We're just going to do this that whoever's watching at home isn't going to see me, but what are you going to do?
We'll record it, please.
Oh yeah, it's just being recorded as we speak. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I shared the link online for everybody, and I guess we'll begin with Sukkah. I didn't actually bring my hard copy of Maseches Sukkah this time. One of the things I did, if you're following on the papers, I put Rashi's commentary. I actually just imposed it onto the text. So if you read here, we're on Sukkah Mem Aleph. We're in Perek Lulav HaGazul. So we're going to see this Sukkah now because it's relevant to this time of year. For those of you not counting at home, we're in the middle of Sfiras Omer. So today is the 31st day of the Omer, if I'm not mistaken. It's been 5 weeks and 6 days that we've been counting, and we're doing quite well. So you'll notice in Lulav HaGazul, suddenly we get something involved there, which has to do with this season. So because we're here and it's almost time to complete the count, we should discuss it. I'd also like to point out, just as a general introduction, this, what?
It's my mother's yard.
Yeah,
Okay.
right, the learning is Layla.
Oh, I just got a text message that the learning is Lulay someone else, but okay. Yeah. It's okay. We could do this for many people. So this past Shabbos, we read Parshas Bahar, and then Bechukosai. Bechukosai was a Takanos Chazal that we read it this time of year. Chazal said that Ezra already in his time had it that we're supposed to read the Tochacha of Vayikra before Shavuos, and the Tochacha and Devarim before Rosh Hashanah. Now the question is why? If you're going to read Tochachas before certain times of year, the question that needs to be asked is, why did they connect this Tochacha with Shavuos and the other Tochacha with Rosh Hashanah? And the textual reason is because of a running theme in Sefer Vayikra, and that is that whoever undergoes a form of purification has to count 7 days in order to complete that purification. Examples of someone counting 7 days for purification are the Nida, the Zava, the Zav, the Mitzorah, and the Yoledet. All of them, earlier in this book, have to count 7 days in order to purify themselves. Later, we are also going to read that one who is purifying himself from the contamination due to contact with the dead, Tumath Meith, also has a 7-day stage of purification. So that's a tip-off. And then we find that the Bar-Hayim says this whole idea of Sfiras Omer, the fact is that it tells you to count 7 weeks and to count 50 days. Chazal said, this must be, there's a mitzvah to count the days and to count the weeks. If you have it that someone counts 7 times 7, count 7 days and hold on to that and count that week and then count another week and count another week, obviously we are discussing an act of great purification, 7 acts of purification. That's why you have this Kabbalistic idea that getting ready for Kabbalah Torah, you have to get out the 49 gates of Tuma and be ready to receive the Torah. That is what Sfiras Omer is in Pshat. This is a running theme of Sefer Vayikra. In Parshas Emor, we have Sfiras Omer. Sfiras Omer is 7 times 7, a count of 7 times 7. In Parshas Bahar, we are introduced to the idea of Shemitah and Yovel. Shemitah means count years. How many times to get to a Yovel? 7 times 7. The Yovel is year 50. And then we have in Bechukosai the punishment. The punishment, as Chazal pointed out, is 7 times 7. That's the running theme of the punishments. And Chazal said, if you do your math, you will find there are 49 individual tochachas in Parshas Bechukosai. In Devarim, it's twice as much, 98. So you see that the tochacha of Vayikra fits the season of Sfiras HaOmer, whereas the tochacha of Devarim, which is not predicated on this theme of 7 times 7, it's just one after another, okay? one wallop after another, but it is connected to ultimately the next parsha with Nitzavim, in which the greatest mitzvah of Nitzavim is Teshuvah, repentance. So that is the connection between the years. Now we're going to get how our Gemara, Lulav HaGazul, is connected to Sfiras Omer. Let's begin with the Mishnah on Mem Aleph. We see here, Barishana haya Lulav nital b'mikdash shiva uva medina yom echad. Originally, the taking of the Lulav in the Mikdash, whatever the Mikdash may be, you're going to see that the Machlokes was a 7-day commandment. As the verse states, you should celebrate before your God 7 days. The celebration is through keeping the commandments, in this case specifically the commandment to take the Lulav. And Medina, that's not Mikdash, it was only 1 day. I'll read you what Rashi says. Kiddarshinan b'torat kohanim mi usmachtem lifnei Hashem lokechem shivat yamim. Celebrate before the Lord thy God 7 days. Velo bigvulin shiva yamim, but not elsewhere. Gvulin means beyond. Usually when Rashi says it's beyond Jerusalem. And he'll be explicit. He says, Ba Medina. What's Medina according to Rashi? Yerushalayim, Sha'af Hu Bigvulim. That means if you were actually in the temple, then you would take your lulav all 7 days. But if you're just in Jerusalem, only on the first day of the mitzvah of taking the lulav, and Kal v'chomer elsewhere beyond Jerusalem. I put a pink asterisk. Those who printed this with color see that the asterisk is pink. Others, what? Oh, he doesn't have it. Marmakomos.
I sent it to everything, to the WhatsApp. He did send it, but I don't see Shilo here. I did send it.
Right, it says at the beginning, Marmakomos l'shiurim l'krat chagas shavuot, and then it says Sukkah mem aleph. Aleph, Sukkah mem aleph.
Did I not?
Yeah.
Did I send it all?
Okay. Yeah.
About this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll get to that later. Yeah. So that's the one you should have, the long one. No. We're the longer one. That's only in Hebrew.
Right.
It doesn't have the calendar. Okay.
Definitely send it all three. Huh?
Good.
Okay, so.
Ruba Kachulo.
Hiatus.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't stop. Yeah, okay. It's 6:30 of minutes. Everybody's getting this,
Oh, I'm sorry. I was really excited. So
most people look at it, not on the email. I finally figured out how to transfer from email to WhatsApp.
really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you just have to download it to your computer, but yeah. Here, remember, gentlemen, you have a problem with the technology. How to do it? Find someone much younger. Okay, ask a teenager, and it should be quite simple.
Yeah.
So Rashi here says that Medina refers to Jerusalem, and this has, I guess, grammatical basis because already in late biblical times, the word Medina is used to describe a city-state, usually a walled city that was its own self-governing entity, and that's what says Achashverosh ruled over 127 Medinot. That's what he was referring to. That's what that meant. So Rashi's being consistent. As we're going to see the pink asterisk, Rambam says, the Ferusha Rambam in the Mishnah, a few places, he says Mikdash is Jerusalem, the entire Jerusalem, and Medina is the rest of Eretz Yisrael. That's ironic because if you actually do like a search through everything the Rambam says, half the time Rambam says Mikdash is the entire city of Jerusalem, at least the old city, as it was then. And the rest of the time he says Mikdash means the Temple Mount. And that's very important, especially with temple-related issues. The Rambam holds, without a doubt, that Mikdash certainly includes the entire Temple Mount. And that's a nafkamina, like I said, this past, what is that, a baby?
I'm lighter.
Yeah.
I really like to do that.
Oh, he'd like to be there. It's not telling me he's wants to come in. I'm not getting anything about anybody in the waiting room. I don't see him in the waiting room.
Hold on.
Yeah,
But
send them the link. Okay, send the link that I sent this week. Okay, so, and that's actually very important for us because we took the Arava. It says there's also a commandment to take the Arava in the Mikdash. So the nafkamina was some of us went up to the Temple Mount this past year on Chol Hamoed, and we had Aravot with us, and we paraded around with the Aravot until we were stopped. But that was a commandment that we fulfilled. As far as I know, it's the first time in a few hundred years that Jews have actually kept that commandment. So King Yerbu, maybe God willing that this year everybody join in with us and keeping that commandment. The Mishnah continues. Mishacharav Beit Hamikdash hitkin Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai shehei lulav nital b'amdina shiva zecher lamikdash. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was around when the temple was destroyed, he made an enactment that the lulav be taken even beyond Mikdash, whatever that is in the Medina, all 7 days as a memory to what was done in the Mikdash. V'shehei yom is, how do you pronounce the next words? Is it henef or hanef? I could see arguments for both. Okay, what? Hanef, yeah, okay. That's what people know, like hanetza chama. When you say hanetza chama, that hey is not a prefix; it's part of the word. Nafkamina, there's a kametz under the hey and no dot in the nun. If it was the netza chama, whatever a netz is a type of bird, so it'd be han netz with the tatach under the hey and a dot in the nun. So you know it as hanef. Hanef meaning day of waving, but you could also say that perhaps grammatically it should be henef. Okay, there is an argument to me that it's henef, like kesef, but we'll work with hanef. Yom hanef. What's yom hanef? Hanef is part of relates to the word tinufa. Tinufa is an act of ceremonial waving. Things that are brought to the temple and presented to the Kohen are picked up and waved, and not like waving like Lulav, but more like molichu maybe. Lift it up or go like that, back and forth. That's Yom Hanef. So what are they referring to when they say this? They're talking about the Omer. Rashi says, Shel Omer. It means that on the first day of Chol Moed Pesach, the Hainu Taz b'Nisan, Shisha Asar b'Nisan, that's the 16th of Nisan, Kulo Asur Bechadash, entire day you can't eat the new crop of grain. Uve Od HaMikdash Kayam, and as long as the temple was standing, Misha Karava Omer Hayu Ochalim Chadash Bo Bayom. When the temple stood, they were pretty confident that the priests, the Beis Din, would bring this Korban Omer. The bringing of the Korban Omer is what permits the new grain crop to be eaten. And that very day, people knew they could start eating the new grain crop. Of course, not everybody has new grain because you have to actually start harvesting it. But assuming there was already new grain, and grain includes barley, which is usually ripe before the wheat. Generally speaking, the grains they had, barley and wheat. So barley goes first. That's what we have here. Barley offered on the second day of Passover. That korban permits the crop now to be eaten if people were to be reaping it. So he says, yeah, that was the case then. They had confidence that this would happen. And why did they wait for the korban to be brought? Because it says ad haviachem, until you all bring it. And they assumed it was brought first thing in the morning. When the temple was destroyed, mutar min haTorah mi sheheir hamizrach. Once the temple is not standing, the assumption is the korban will not be brought. What permits the new grain crop to be eaten that very day? Heir. It says heir hamizrach. That means sunrise. It means dawn. Heir mizrach is a reference to the fact that it starts getting light in the east even before the sun rises. Alos hashachar, basically. Kida Amar bin Machot. It says that in Menachot. Katuv echad omer ad etzem hayom hazeh. One verse says, don't eat the grain crop until this very day, or that very day. Ad etzem hayom hazeh is a reference. What? Sometimes it does. Okay. Hayom hazeh dahainu heir mizrach. It's definitely the day. It means heir mizrach. That's what it says here. V'katuv echad omer ad haviachem. In this case, they darshan it. They said etzem hayom hazeh is when it's definitely this day when the sun is shining or when there's sunlight, as opposed to at night. And then the next verse says that the matir, the halachic mechanism that allows them to eat the grain crop, is the bringing of this korban omer. Ha ketzad. So how do we resolve these? Bisman deika omer ad haviachem. When you are actually bringing the omer because the temple is standing, so the cutoff point is, or the matir point is when the korban is brought. Uvisman teleka omer, and when there is no omer because there is no temple, ad etzem, until that very day. Hold on, now someone's coming in. I'm going to let him in. The Asar Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai lehem kol hayom kidfaresh tama b'gemara. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's chiddush was, now that the temple is not standing, we are not going to revert to the original law that Taz Nisan starts. It's the first day of Chol Moed. Now you can start eating the grain crop. Instead, we're going to tell people today, don't eat the grain. Wait for tomorrow. We're going to see what's that about. And Yeah, that's so the Mishnah concludes kulo basur. Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai's enactment makes it that you can't eat the new grain crop on the second day of Passover. You have to wait for the third. God willing, the temple should be rebuilt, and this will no longer be an issue. We'll go back to waiting for the korban to be brought. Well,
Hello?
no, you make matzahs from last year's grain crop. Usually that's what it is. You
Oh,
know,
it's okay, Larry. I just want to know
the new, you
why
can,
the shul, I couldn't get onto the
follow
shiur.
whatever it is you want to eat.
I'm okay now.
Oh, good. Okay. Welcome aboard.
Okay. It's a different rabbi, apparently.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Look, if I find Rabbi Nadel, I'll let him
Yeah,
join.
I've got the link now. I've got it. Murray sent it. Thanks a lot.
So what we're saying, technically speaking, once the korban omer is brought, you could then use that grain. You could eat it raw if you want, or you could do whatever you want. Make matzahs out of it, as long as you don't make it into chametz, because then you're going to be creating a problem. Okay, let us continue over here. The Gemara says, "Minolan da'avdinan zecher lamikdash." How do we know that there's this idea of avdinan zecher lamikdash? It's kind of strange. If you read this question as, "How do we know you should do a zecher lamikdash?" What do you mean? Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai declared it. It makes sense. You know, the idea of, let's say, a memorial day for the deceased is quite a new thing in Jewish history. Yizkor, Hazkars Neshamos, Yurtzites, all those other minhagim are not mentioned whatsoever in the Gemara. Rambam and Rif and Rush don't discuss such things ever. It's a later idea, and this idea of memorial days for fallen soldiers, victims of terror, just martyrs, everybody else, that's also relatively new in both human history, generally speaking. The British were big on this, and also among us Jews. So this is a good question, Zecher L'Mikdash. Why do you need to make a Zecher L'Mikdash? Why is this, let's say, a Jewish value of ours? And the answer, Rabbi Yochanan says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Kra, I put it here with the dots so everybody could see it here. Aleh arucha lach. What's an arucha? V'aleh arucha marpei l'chol tachluenu. That's Nusach Sfarad. And arucha is a synonym for a healing, a remedy. Umimakotayich erpaech, and I will also heal thee from your, wounds, I think flesh wounds. Ne'um Hashem, saith the Lord, ki nidacha karu ulach, because they have called you rejected. Nidacha is pushed aside. Sion hi doresh ein la. It is Zion is she, doresh ein la, but no one seeks her out. God says in the end, He'll remember Zion and comfort Zion, of course, that we've lived to see that. We should live to see even more greater extent of the comfort of Zion. But in the times of the Churban, people did not seek Zion. The mitzvah of going to find the place of the temple is L'shechno tidrishu uvata shama. Seek out his place of dwelling and go there. Yes, sir. Yeah. No, unfortunately. The Vilna Gaon, though, takes this to a very strong conclusion. He says it's very important that whatever minhag you do, Zeichel HaMikdash, you do in the way that reminds you of what was done in the temple. In this particular case, what do we see? They used to take the Lulav all 7 days of Sukkot in the Mikdash. So what do? We take the Lulav all 7 days. We do exactly as it was. So the Vilna Gaon likes, for example, the minhag of Shir Shel Yom. The sages did not tell us recite a psalm every day that corresponds to the song that the Levites sang in the temple. But we do that now as a reminder what would happen in the Mikdash, so we know what's going on. But we should not do it in a way that contradicts what they did in the temple. Nafkamina, like they do in this synagogue and other ones. They tell you one Shir Shel Yom per day. It's Rosh Chodesh and it's also Sunday. So what are they going to tell you to do? Don't say the Sunday song, say the Rosh Chodesh song. Why? Why can I say both? It's both Sunday and there's Rosh Chodesh. Because apparently the temple, they only had one song. So if you would even do this minhag slightly differently than they did in the temple, you're not doing it right. And on the other hand, there's a minhag that the Vilna Gaon doesn't like. He says, minhag of Shulchan Aruch, they bake their matzah when? Erev Pesach. Why dafka the afternoon of Erev Pesach? What's the mile of baking your matzah then, as opposed to, let's say, a week before or a month before? assuming you have a way to store it so it won't go bad before that, like we have. Anybody participate in baking matzah the afternoon of Erev Pesach? Why then?
Almost like the fugu matzah
No.
baking latte.
No, that's not what. Well, no, I said, why would you want to bake your matzah then? So the answer is because normally what you're supposed to be doing Erev Pesach afternoon, 2:00 in the afternoon before Passover, is you're supposed to be processing the Korban Pesach. That's time for slaughtering the Korban Pesach and burning the fat and throwing the blood on the altar and preparing it for its consumption. So if you don't have Korban Pesach, what do we eat instead of Korban Pesach? I think we had a share about this. What do we eat instead of Korban Pesach? We eat a little bit of matzah, right? At least this year. God willing, we'll stop this minhag. Should eat real Korban Pesach. So if you don't have Korban Pesach, you eat a little matzah. So we'll prepare that matzah. The matzah of the mitzvah we'll prepare during Erev Pesach. The Vilna Gaon says, oh, that would be good. That which you eat instead of the Korban Pesach to prepare when you're preparing Korban Pesach, except sometimes Erev Pesach is Shabbos. And when Erev Pesach is Shabbos, you go ahead making your Korban Pesach just like you would during a weekday. There's no nafkamina really. But you cannot bake matzah on Shabbos Erev Pesach. So it doesn't fit perfectly. So that's why Rabbi Maimon writes in his biography of the Vilna Gaon, he never met the Vilna Gaon, but he met an old man who said that he had seen the Vilna Gaon. This is in Vilna before World War I. So Rabbi Maimon wrote that his father concerned himself of the followers of the Vilna Gaon, and he didn't let Rabbi Maimon, at the time Rabbi Fishman, participate in the baking of matzah Erev Pesach because the Vilna Gaon didn't do that. Okay, so there you go. It's very important to do these things. And yes, every time you have a Zecher L'Mikdash, it is not a mitzvah d'oraisa. The Torah gave us that mitzvah to build a temple. As the Rambam says, the commandment is either build the temple, and there's nothing that prevents that mitzvah from being in force. There are mitzvahs that we don't do when there's no temple. You don't bring Omer, you don't bring Bikurim, you don't give Machatzis a shekel. But the mitzvah to build the temple and to upkeep the temple, if it is built, is always in force. Nafkamina. Today, we should be building a temple. Just to know, that's a Jewish thing, yeah.
Yeah, the school still like on myself. If it is that you stay in Colorado,
Yes.
but if it's Wednesday, you don't stay.
Yeah, you tried to say what he apparently was reconstructing in the temple. They did in the temple, although it is not clear. How do we know that Bar Nafshi was the song that they sang in the temple? That they try to say is a little bit iffy. People claim that, but there's no ancient source that indicates that was a Shir Shel Yom of Rosh Chodesh. Assuming it was, okay. What did they do in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, in the times of Elia Cohen, before most of the Tehillim had been composed? Well, the answer is a lot of the Tehillim predate David HaMelech. And the Gemara says that, for example, the Shirat Hayam and Ha'azinu served as songs that they sang in, let's say, the Shiloh sanctuary on Shabbos. Okay, so it wasn't that they were lacking psalms to sing. Okay, let's continue. V'sheyeh Yom Hanef. This is our sugya, that the Yom Hanef should be a day when the new grain crop is still entirely forbidden until tomorrow. That's Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai's takana. My tama, what's the reason for this? Mirehira yibaneh Beit HaMikdash. God willing, the temple should be built soon. And Rashi adds, V'achzor davar li'isuro. If we were to actually do what we're supposed to do and build the temple today, then by next Passover we will have the grain crop. We will have the Omer. And that which will permit us to eat the new grain crop will be the bringing of the Omer. And what will happen? Dahashta karinam bei adav yachem. And then it will bring us back to the new standard. When you bring the korban, then the Omer is permitted, and then the grain crop is permitted. If people get too used to doing this as it was, that, you know what, the day starts, it's already permissible because there is no temple. People will come to get used to eating kadash, the new grain crop, first thing in the morning on Chol HaMoed, and they will not wait for the korban to be brought. V'yomeru, they will say, Eshtakad. Eshtakad means last year. Milo achanu beher mizrach. Hashtanami nechol. Last year we ate the new grain crop first thing in the morning. This year also, and they won't know that they have to wait. V'inu lo yadeh, and they will not know. The ishtakad lo have beit hamikdash. Last year there was no temple. This year there is. Heir mizrach hetir. Last year when there was no temple, you had an easier standard. But now the temple's built, it's a harder standard. Hashta deika Beit HaMikdash Omer matir. Now, if there's a temple, the bringing of the Omer is the matir, the mechanism that allows us to eat the grain crop. Okay, we have a long kasha here. I made it one paragraph and also marked it in red. Do you see that? Those who printed with color, it says the Ibni Emath. We're going to ask this question: when will the temple be built? Okay, or basically, what's the Mishnah entertaining? Okay, so if we had the case where I said you could build the temple in ER, that'd be just fine. People will understand this. The Gemara will entertain. What if the temple is sort of built last minute, right on the day we're discussing? Rashi explains, "V'ibnei emath." When will the temple be built? Ach chashasha dechayshinon limheira yibaneh. The Gemara said it will be built speedily. That means perhaps faster than most people can anticipate. Rabbi Faskowitz in Hillcrest was here in '67. He was studying the Mir, and he says that the result of the 6-Day War was what's that word? Ooh, he used a fancy word that ends in E. I just forgot what it was. I'm forgetting my English. Well, okay, so you know the word he used? You know what word he used? What word he used for this? The feeling was we weren't expecting it all, just discovering not only surviving, but getting a even bigger surprise. I'll remember it soon. I want to say the word. So Rabbi Faskowitz said this. He said, sometimes they weren't prepared. The 6-Day War, basically from eyewitness descriptions, those who were there, they were just trying not to die. They were all expecting to be massacred by the Jordanians and the Egyptians. But not only did they not get massacred, v'nafochu, they survived and they got everything. Well, no, not a kal v'chomer. Sorry, it's serendipity. That was his word. Is that the type of word Rabbi Faskowitz uses? Serendipity. Go look it up. It's Rabbi Faskowitz's word. Okay, so he used that to describe what they had in Yom Yerushalayim. And the problem was the serendipity was only Rabbi Goren was prepared. Okay, now build a temple. Most Jews had originally, if they had remembered davening at the Kotel was an alleyway somewhere in the old city of Jerusalem, and sometimes you could go there to daven when the British let you or when the Ottomans let you, and that's what people ran to. They wanted to see the Kotel again. But no one was thinking we now could get beyond the Kotel and let's say rebuild the temple, which was only Rabbi Goren's there, even to convince other rabbis to think about this, because this has not been something they discussed. So now, thank God, there is a critical mass of scholars and Kohanim and people who need to do this, who are ready now to build the temple if they would get the chance, or at least conduct the temple service. But they weren't ready for this. So, but if rishus everybody else, it's okay if they give you rishus.
I grew up in Northern Australia, which had a lot of Jews who came out to set the revival community. And Yom Ha'atzmaut was a very, very, very big and happy day. In 1967, they were expecting out of the community about 50,000 Jews, there'd be between 5,000 and 7,000 Jews. And they hired the boxing theater, the arena for wrestling and boxing in Melbourne, which was packed. And the guest was Rabbi Garon. Rabbi Garon was the Shaliach from Israel. Remember, it's the 14th, 15th of May. The 6-Day War started on the 6th of June. So we've got a little bit of a gap there. And he spoke. He was not a very soldierly looking person, but he wore his army uniform. And he didn't quite look like Dayan, for example, or a pin. But at the end of it, he said in Yiddish, so that the press wouldn't know. He said, I'll tell you in English. He said, they say there will be a war. This is May the 14th, 15th, and this was happening. They say there will be a war. I do not know whether there will be a war. But if there is a war, I will go shofar at the
So good. Okay, glad it came true.
And 2 weeks later, there's a picture of him doing it.
Yeah. So Rabbi Goren, I've read about it. So Rabbi Goren was the one who has this. Rashi uses the word chayshinon. Chayshinon, in this case, means more like a worry. There's a chashash of something. Why is there a chayshinon? He uses that word also in Tainus to talk about this idea, the way he explains the Gemara, saying that the temple might be built much quicker than people are anticipating, and they won't be ready, and it'll lead to halachic problems. Right now, for example, he gives Kohanim are allowed to drink wine. no Kohen knows when his family used to serve in the temple, so he doesn't have to worry that perhaps today's his date to serve, so he shouldn't be getting shikr. And really, you should say that all Kohanim should not be drinking, period, because Meheri Yabana Mikdash. And Rashi says, no, we don't, lo chayshinun lezeh. We're not worried about such a thing. And Ravid echoes his sentiments. Maimonides disagrees entirely. I don't think Maimonides would use this type of language. And he also holds differently than Rashi, by the way. Rambam says, yeah, Meheri Yabana Mikdash, you have to anticipate that the Mikdash will be built. You do halakhically have to anticipate that, and you'll get a chance. So Rashi and Rambam would use different terminology. It reflects their different viewpoints. He says, "Chayshinon limheri yibane emat tigmor hamalacha deika lemechash leisur chadash kol hayom." Rashi says, this question is assuming that the temple is built so fast that suddenly the question of chadash will come up that very day. The itztrich l'Rabban ben Zakkai lemeisar hashta kol yom mishum sircha dahu yoma. He has to make a takana now when the temple is destroyed, to remind people that on the 16th of Nisan, don't eat your chadash right away, because it could very well be that they won't have time. Assuming the temple would be built now, let's say, we have a long time before Passover. By then, they could tell people, and by the way, don't eat the new grain crop until we bring this korban. The word will get out. People know there's a temple. Or by Sukkot's time, people are visiting the temple, so they'll know not to eat the chadash. So it must be that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's takana of don't eat the new grain crop the first day of Sukkot is anticipating that the temple will be built so soon before that event that you won't be able to explain to people that the rules have now been changed. Okay, that's what Rashi's saying. Ilema de ivnei b'shitsar. Shitsar means the 16th in Aramaic. If we say that the temple will be rebuilt on the 16th of Nisan, which is the first day of Chol Moed, the day they're supposed to bring the Omer, Shelo nivna ad taz atzmo, means that the temple would actually get built the 16th of Nisan. Harei hitir heir mizrach. Then the fact that the sun was shining already, or first thing in the morning, that allowed the Omer to be brought. Why? Because the temple wasn't complete until sometime later in the day. V'shapir ka'achle, and then people are allowed to eat. Rashi continues, Dehoy the heir mizrach, being that the sun has already come up, it's already daytime. Ve'ein mikdash banui is terei bechadash. The temple's still not completely built. They're going to complete it in about 3 hours or so. So now the chadash has already become permitted. So he says, the Gemara continues, it must be, we rejected that the temple will be rebuilt actually on the 16th of Nisan. Ella de ibnei b'chamesar. So the temple will be rebuilt on the 15th. That's the first day of Passover. And Rashi adds, o kodem lachem, or sometime before that. Dechi mata shitzar, because once the 16th arrives, lo hitir he'im mizrach, because that won't allow the beginning of the day on the 16th. That won't allow us to eat the new grain crop. The temple is already standing sometime before that, so it would have to be the Omer doing that. Sharia mikdash banui, temple's already standing. Hilkach achlei isura, they would be eating forbidden food if they do eat the Omer first thing in the morning on the 16th of Nisan. V'gazar Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai hashta mishum hahu yoma. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's takana, let's say now, prevents this eventuality from happening, that they'll eat the new grain on the first day of Chol Moed Nisan sometime later this year, because the temple will be built sometime before that day. And the Gemara continues, Mechatzot hayom ulhalan tishtarei. At least if the temple was built sometime before they have to bring the Omer, by noon they would have brought the Omer. Let noon be the matir, not have to wait the entire day. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai could have said, wait until noon, because even when the temple would be standing eventually, they'll likely bring the korban by noon. Rashi continues, Hashta di'inami achli hahu yoma mechatzot hayom. If we allow people to eat the new grain crop from midday on, hayom u'halan kesircha did meikara nachle, that is the same thing they were doing in the olden days. Veleka isura devadai karafa omer. Usually they assumed once you get past the first half of the day on Chol Moed, they had brought the Omer already. I mean, it's the second thing they bring. Actually, the third thing. There's the Tamid, and then there's the Musaf for Pesach, which is a lot more animals. But then the Omer, it's a lot easier to bring the Omer than to bring, let's say, any other burnt offering, which is mostly what the Musaf consists of, right? A lot of sheep. So Rashi, the Gemara has asked a good question here. And the Gemara is going to back this up. As it says, the Hatanan, Harachokim, the Mishnah says that the people who are far from where? Rashi continues, Mirushalayim, Lo hayu ro'in v'lo hayu shomi'im sha'at hakravada omer. People far from Jerusalem, let's say Modi'in, they don't see Jerusalem, they don't hear what's going on in Jerusalem, but they can assume that in Jerusalem, that first day of Chol Moed, the Omer has been brought properly, so by noon they could eat the new grain crop. Mutarim bechadash, Rashi adds bechadash, mechatzot Omer lahalan, from noon on. So why is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's takana more machmir than it could possibly have been? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, don't eat the grain crop first thing in the morning, because if there's a temple, you'd have to wait for the Omer to be brought. Yeah, but if the Omer would have been brought, it would have been brought by noon. So the limit of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's takana, preventing people from eating the grain crop, should be the limit as existed in temple times, noon, generally speaking. Rashi continues, Lefisha yodeim she'ein beitin mitatzlim bo bilakrivo kodem chatzo. People know that the Beis Din's not going to be lackadaisical, or as we say in slang, lackadaisical, from bringing this korban before midday. That Beis Din, they're not lazy; they get around. So that's the kasha. The kasha is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, assuming the temple could have been built whenever, still should have limited his prohibition that he enacted to not eating the grain crop the first half of the first day of Chol Moed Pesach. Don't have to osir it the entire day. So the Gemara explains, Lo, tzricha, he needed to do such a thing. The ibnei belelia. What if the temple were to be built at night? Rashi says, Kilomar, l'shema yibaneh b'layla chayish. He's worried, or I guess worried, once again, chayish. Has a concern? Yeah, concerned, but still, I'm not so concerned. The temple, I'd be celebrating. I don't care. You build the temple at night, by day, whatever. Just get it done. He says, "V'lo yehu pnuyim liktor ha'omer." They're, let's say, going to be putting the finishing touches on the temple the night of the 16th of Pesach, Motzei Yontif Rishon, and they won't have time to reap the Omer. The reaping of the Omer is supposed to be when? The night before. Okay, second night of Passover, first Motzei Yontif. That's when they reap the Omer. Ad samuch liyom, and they'll only get around to it very late in the morning, maybe 4 o'clock in the morning, right before the day starts. V'ish torach harbei ba'omer, and then processing this grain, there's a lot to it. They have to. Rashi brings from the Mishnayos. Shayu me'abashimoto be'avuv shel klaim v'tzovrimoto she'azuvu meimav. First, they would dry it out really well to get all the liquids out of it. By the way, can you grind fresh wheat into flour? Does that work? No, it gets pasty. In order to grind wheat to flour, you have to have it nice and dry. So you have to dry it out. V'tochaninoto b'reichaim shel grossoth. They would grind it in these mills of grossoth, not related to me. In this case, grossoth means not such a fine mill. You want big chunks. So I think maybe, who knows, but now in English also from the German, gross is sometimes not so processed, like the raw material, right? Gross product. Okay. Uminifinoto b'shloshasar nafeh. And then they would sift it in 13 sieves. Bigasa bidaka. Okay. First the sieve with the big holes, and then the one with the small holes. Kidamrin on hatam, as we said there. If they couldn't start dealing with this Omer at the beginning of the night when they normally would, Tilat Laila is something else we're going to see shortly. Could very well be that they would only get to bring this Omer afternoon. So it's not such a far chashash. The Gemara continues, Inami, another answer, Samuch l'shkiyat hachama, or not that the temple was built, it was just built late in the day on the 15th. The Ibni b'chamesar, Rashi says, it was built on the 15th of Nisan, Samuch l'shkiyat hachama v'hihi. And that's another answer to this question. Now, shkiyat hachama is generally speaking, Rashi points out here, if you just read Rashi, he says, the beginning of the Lila was when they were supposed to pick the Omer, but they only finished building the temple right before sundown. Rashi, following the Rishalmi and the Rambam, equates the end of the day and the beginning of the night with Shkia. In some places, yes, Tzeis, I was trying to compile all sorts of sources to show to the youngsters the previous month how many places halachically we assume that Shkia is the line between night and day. Day ends at Shkia, sunset, night begins at sunset, and only for 3 dinim in Shas do we have a chashash that will wait until Tzesach HaKol Chavim. it is very strange that for basically everything halachically speaking in the world, now we wait for tzeis and say, no, you have to be machmir. You want to do something, it's by tzeis time. And we keep finding more and more examples where it's the case where really, strictly speaking, it's shkia is the line. And it always was the line. So, but you see, this is just another example that Rashi brings us such a thing. Rashi was not as machmir as we are. We almost want to say that if it was the case that for every mitzvah you do, like Kriyat Shema, you should do after Tzeis HaKochavim, so it's definitely night, that should have been the first Mishnah in Shas. The first Mishnah in Shas talks about the time of Kriyat Shema. It mentions Kriyat Shema is from basically Tzeis, when the Kohanim are pure enough to eat their truma. That's also a din, explicit in the verse, that's Tzeis. How do we know? How do I know to say Shema at Tzeis? It says, B'shoch B'cha. Doesn't just say at night, it says when you lie down. Chazal said, that's a later time in the night. And the Kohanim are only pure, Vashemesh V'taher. Not just the sun sets, V'taher, the skies be cleared of all the light. Also, that's Tzeis. Those are explicitly in the Torah. What happened with Rabbi Gamliel's sons? What does it say? They were late. They missed Zaman Kriyat Shema, right? Because Chazal instituted be done until midnight. So they thought they missed it. Rabbi Gamliel taught them. Whenever you have a rule of a night mitzvah, whenever you have a night mitzvah, the rule is really you have until daybreak. But Chazal said, do it by chatzot, so you don't mess up. Why didn't Rabbi Gamliel also tell them, my children, here's another klal, like nowadays you find hachlal chasmarim. Whenever you have something to be done at night, do it after tzeis, but not just at shkia. He could have said that also, but he didn't. And the Mishnah says the opposite. The Mishnah says, dafka for Kriyat Shema and Hariv Shemesh, when the Kohanim are pure, and for letting out Shabbos, we have verses that tell us you wait for tzeis. But other than that, it's explicit. Mariv and all these other mitzvahs, when are they done? By shkia. And we're going to see shortly a proof to an interesting position that I find very surprising. Okay, so yeah. I don't know what you mean by the practice of plug mincha. What do you mean by the practice?
Well, some people down clock, down, like an hour and 50, 40 down, and go right into Harvard, and, the later you possible, reconcile down earlier, saying earlier, and then just having to say it again later.
Oh, so that's a regalachas. I put out something on YouTube about this earlier this month. I put out something on YouTube for this earlier this month. So I'll defer you to that. Well, I'll refer you to that. Okay. But it is a good question. Certainly the Vilna Gaon and the Gemara don't have a hakpada. The Shulchan Aruch don't tell anybody that you have to daven mincha before plag in order to take in Shabbos early. That's a chumrah of the Magen Avraham and the Mishnah Berurah, but it's certainly not required by earlier poskim and even later poskim. Okay, so it's a chumrah. Or what I'd say, not even a chumrah, I call it a hakpada. That'd be the more proper term for it. So yeah, I'll send you the sources about that. Rashi here has a question for which basically became one of the animamins. Okay, Rashi has a question and an answer that the Tosafists adopt also. But like I said, it became an animamin, so much so that I know of great scholars who say that this must be the case, even though there's other perfectly logical conclusions that can be drawn from it. Let's see what I put this in red. Rashi's kasha in red. Vi kasha laila eno nivna. The kasha is, how are you supposed to build a temple at night? Kaimalon b'Shavuot. We have a halacha in Shavuot. How come no one learned Shavuot, that Masechta before Shavuos? We learned Pesachim before. Oh, it's talking about, it's not weeks. Oh, okay. It's the Shavua, not a Kamitz. It's a good teretz. So why the Shavuos has its own Masechta? It doesn't need it. There's not many halachas there. We learn Sfiras Omer is a Masechta, is in Menachos. And by the way, there is a Masechta that's relevant to Shavuos. It's called Bikurim. Okay. So Yom HaBikurim. So he says here in Shavuos, the Ein Binyan Beit HaMikdash Balayla. The Rambam Paskins this way. You're supposed to build the Mikdash by day, but you take a break at night. Dechtiv Uvyom Hakim V'lo B'Chamesar. Says Uvyom Hakim HaKamishkan, and not on the 15th. We're going to see, we give a regular shir on these halachas. There is a kasha over here because it says Uvyom Hakim HaKamishkan. I think it was the Rabaz has a kasha. It says the Rambam says that they didn't build the Choma then, whatever. I'll send you a link also to that. But basically speaking, there is a pasuk that indicates that you're only supposed to build a base of mikdash during the day. There's a mesmachta from Nehemiah, but then again, Nehemiah was talking about building the walls outside Jerusalem, the outer walls of the city, not of the temple itself. Okay. And he continues, V'lo b'chameisar. Not only that, you shouldn't build a temple on the 15th of Nisan. What is the 15th of Nisan? Well, it's a yontif. You could build a temple on Chol Hamoed. You can build it on Pesach, just not on the yontif of Pesach. Shu Yom Tov. The Kaim Alon, we also have a halacha, also in Shavuos, the Ein Yemini on Beis HaMikdash Doche Yom Tov, just like Shabbos. You don't build a Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos, you don't build a Beis HaMikdash on Yom Tov. So 2 times you're not supposed to build a Beis HaMikdash, night and what's called Mikra Kodesh, a Sabbath of the Lord. So that's a good kasha of Rashi. Why did the Gemara even entertain that the temple would be built at night or on the 15th? Yeah? So you're giving the answer that's Mashma and the Rambam and others. And the answer is, do like Solomon did. Really, anybody ever see a large building is built, and sometimes it's already complete, but then they're going to cut the ribbon. They finish all the finishing touches Erev Shabbos, but they're only going to have the ribbon cutting ceremony at Sunday morning at 10. That's what they did with the first temple. Also, they completed it, and then everybody gathered together for the big inauguration. And the Mishkan itself, by the way, the Mishkan was ready, and Moshe Rabbeinu was told, set up the Mishkan and inaugurate it when? On the 1st of Nisan. Wait a while. So too, you could have this putting the finishing touches on the temple service. Putting the finishing touches on the temple doesn't mean that it's all going to happen in one overnight, literally. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither will the temple be built in a day. Or another answer that's perfectly valid is the temple service will be restored. You don't actually have to build the whole temple in order to restore the service. History has shown, and I showed you gentlemen this in February, that indeed, with regards to every temple and Mishkan as it was, the temple service was started before the temple went into service, before they officially dedicated it. So second temple times, the first thing they did was build the Mizbeach, start the Korban Tamid and Korban Pesach, and then they got building the second temple. And the first temple also, King David found where to put the altar first and declared, this is the altar, and started offering sacrifice there before he even broke ground on the first temple. So you understand what's the mitzvah of Korban Tamid? Korban Tamid had to be done in the Mishkan, right? Olaf Tamid ha'asiyah b'Har Sinai. The Olas Tamid started at Ma'amad Har Sinai almost 10 months before they actually built the Mishkan. So it's not such a kasha in Rashi, but Rashi asked this kasha. We just saw 2 answers that say, practically speaking, they'll either just start the service or they'll put the finishing touches, the grand inauguration. But Rashi's assuming the temple would actually be built overnight. So Rashi answers to his own kasha, Hani mili binyan habanui bidei adam. That's something that's built by the hand of man. Aval mikdash he'atid, the future temple, she'anu mitzapim, but we're the one for which we are hoping, or we're looking forward to, anticipating. Banui u'mishuchlalhu. It's already built, it's complete. So where is it? Yigalev yavo mishamayim. It will be revealed and come down from heaven. I guess. Shneimar mikdash Hashem konani yadecha. It says the mikdash, the temple that your hands, O Lord, have actually prepared. Now this understanding of the pasuk is quite literal. It's not as literally taken by the rest of the Rishonim. For example, Rambam and others would say, no, it's a mitzvah. So Rashi offers this as an idea. Like I said, many have taken this, starting from Rashi, his successors, and I think some chief rabbis, certainly some Hasidic groups, have taken this literally so much so that they hold that you may not do anything to even try to go to Har HaBayis and potentially build a temple or start a temple service. You're not allowed to. And doing so is a grave sin. This is, like I said, it's become their animam. It's the basis of their entire ideology. Thank God, most of us don't hold that way. But not only that, because there's an easier teretz to Rashi. What Rashi's saying is a very big chiddush that is not actually said by our sages before Rashi. And not only that, I put the pink asterisk there. You look down below, we actually know that Rashi himself doesn't really say this. Rashi says, for example, Ksubis Hey Amid Aleph, I brought it on the bottom there. It says Darash Bar Kapara. This would be on the 3rd page. Look over there on the 3rd page. begins with the asterisk. Hayim Mikdash Yiboneh Bidei Shemayim says in Ksubis Hayom and Aleph. Darash Bar Kapara Gidolim Maasei Tzadikim Yoter Mi Maasei Shemayim Va'aretz. Okay, the works of the tzaddikim are even greater than the creation of the heaven and earth. Di'ilu b'maasei shemayim va'aretz, with regards to the creation of heaven and earth, Ketiv, it's written, Af Yadi Yasida Aretz. God says, my hand itself founded the earth. V'mini tipecha, and it was my right hand, set it down like this. V'ilu b'maasei yedehem shel tzaddikim, with regards to the handiwork of the righteous, Ketiv, it's written, Machon Shilo pa'alta Hashem mikdash Hashem konenu yadecha. Okay, same pasuk. God, you've created this mikdash. Machon Shilo pa'alta Hashem. This institution for your dwelling that you Hashem have made. Rashi explains mikdash ma'asei tzaddikim hu. Like David Melch said, Bonei Yerushalayim Hashem. What really happens is men do the physical work, and God gives them hatzlacha. That's what it means that God builds something. Doesn't mean that supernatural construction happens. You just have to sit back and the cranes operate themselves, and there's an invisible bricklayer. The bricks lay themselves, so to speak. So Rashi himself didn't really hold of this, and I also put a link there that the portal of Daf Yomi was good enough to compile all these sources for us and show that Rashi himself didn't seem to hold of this idea. Yeah, that's it. The third temple will suddenly just appear miraculously without men doing anything, and that's why it's possible that it'll show up on Yontif or at night, as it may be. Others entertain otherwise. Let's read what the Gra here says. They brought a very good Gra on this very sugya. He says, "V'hu gam kain mechaber shemayim v'aretz." God also puts together. He's the author of heaven and earth. K'moshe amru ksubas hayom and aleph gidolim ma'asei tzadikim yoter mi shemayim v'aretz. We just read this. Shneimar af yadi yasud haaretz v'mini tipecha shemayim uv'mikdash neimar mikdash Hashem konenu yodecha. These psukim, what do they mean? Perush she'akol ma shekonenu yodecha. Whatever has been prepared, it's been done by God's hands. Shenir haya. It appears to us shehayu heimosim v'lo yusim klal. The tzaddikim are doing it. They're not really doing it. It's like fighting a war. Jewish people can't just sit back. Sometimes Kizkiyahu Melech was zoche to this. He didn't need to fight his enemies. God sent an angel and smoked down the entire Assyrian army while he slept. But normally, King David's wars, as he's described in Psalm 18, was God fought his wars. But what it appeared to, if someone had been there with a camera, or the way the Philistines saw it, what did it look like when God fought David's wars? He's still waving a sword. He is making contact. The shield and swords are clanging. Just God's really the one who's running it. It says regarding the Ark of the Covenant and the temple, Even Shlema Masa Nivna. They used it with whole stones. They transported whole stones in order for the construction. Sheheim mirimim ta even. They would lift up this large stone. They used pulleys and some oxen. Aval lo hayu heim mirimim ela shenatan Hashem yitbarach koach ve'rimit yadam. Their hand is lifting it, or the priest carrying the Ark of the Covenant, which is quite heavy. Yeah, it looks like 4 priests are carrying this thing on their shoulders, but really it's God lifting them. Okay. Vezehu sha'amar yadecha konenu otam. Your hands prepared it. So the Vilna Gaon didn't hold like Rashi. He says, yes, men will build the temple. They'll have God's help. We have siyata d'shmaya. Or as it conclude here, l'devar ha'mikdash yibaneh bidei adam, el shakoach nitan lehem bidei shemayim, v'zeh ha'kavana sheyibaneh bidei shemayim. So we shouldn't take it so literally, like Rashi had over here. What? Yeah. Yeah. Well, he sponsored it. Yeah. Or the architect and the one who pays for all of it. Yeah. So he obviously got to also make decisions. How they do it. Like why is it that they use so many imagery in the temple? How many figures, molten figures, are made for the temple? Now, you and I would consider graven images. He made 2 more kruvim and 12 golden oxen, 12 brazen oxen to hold up the yam, as it says. If you would make 1 golden calf, that's about this big. We discussed. Remember the size of the golden calf? It's about this big. that's a grave sin. But if you take this big chunk of bronze and make a life-size ox to put in your temple, or a gigantic 15-foot statue, golden statue of an angel, that's okay for some reason. How do we know this? Must be that some people have the right to tell us what it is. If he could do it, his wisdom was basically on that of a prophet. So we attribute it to him that he made these decisions. Why 10 menorahs? How many menorahs did they fashion for the first temple? 10 more. Is there a mitzvah in the Torah to have 10 menorahs? 11 menorahs total? No, the answer is you're supposed to have one. So must be there was some godly guidance there. When do we have to take break? Just tell me. We have to break at 11? Okay. Yeah, okay. So let me see. We finished the first page there. I want to show we had a few other examples that the Rambam himself doesn't seem to pass. I mentioned that the Rambam calls in the Mishnah his parish to what is this? Meiser Sheni. You see on the second page where it says Iyunim. The Rambam is very clear that he calls Mikdash the city of Jerusalem, and Medina is everything beyond there, the rest of Eretz Yisrael. So that seems to be shot in the Medrash, in the Mishnah. But then you see in Hilchos Lulav, which I brought over here, the Rambam may have recanted this. Even though throughout Perishim Mishnayos, the Rambam says, unlike Rashi, that Medina refers to all of Eretz Yisrael and Mikdash is all of Jerusalem, there's only about one halacha in Mishnah Torah where Rambam sticks to this shot. Throughout Mishnah Torah, which he wrote, by the way, sometime after the Perishim Mishnayos, to say Rambam wrote Perishim Mishnayos as a young man while he was traveling, and the Mishnah Torah was written in his 40s, if I'm not mistaken. In the Mishnah Torah, there's only one halacha where Rambam seems to follow this idea that Mikdash means the city of Jerusalem, and that's with regards to sounding the shofar on Shabbos. If it's Rosh Hashanah and it's Shabbos, so there's a takana. Not everybody sound the shofar, only in certain places that meet certain requirements. There's some today who consider themselves as meeting those requirements, but not according to, let's say, Maimonidean standards. So it's in that case. And we have the example over here in Hilchos Lulav, where Rambam seems to explain our current practice of taking the Lulav 7 days beyond Jerusalem, more like Rashi. And this shouldn't be so far-fetched that Rambam himself would change a little bit from what he wrote in the Perishim Mishnayos, which is not a halacha sefer, to his final psak in the Mishnah Torah. And that there's more work that has been shown by others that indeed you could even find that certain additions in the Mishnah Torah were later, and he made very small changes here and there that changed one word that actually changed his own particular psak. And he wrote Shuvas also explaining these. So Rambam's understanding of this is a little bit vague. But what is clear throughout the Perishim Mishnayos and the Mishnah Torah, beyond a doubt, is that Mikdash does refer to the entire area of Har HaBayis. So, for example, just tomorrow, we're going to Har HaBayis, going tomorrow morning at 7. I invite everybody, if you haven't come already. It's a good thing. It'll certainly make up for the great mistakes that were made every past Yom Yerushalayim for the last, 55 years? Who's keeping track already? There are 56 years now? 56 years. 56 years of Jews ignoring Doresh Ein Law. We just saw this. People are not seeking out God's place. So go seek out with us. Tomorrow morning, the nafkamina is, if the temple is not standing, you can still prostrate yourself on the stones of the temple mount. Normally, let's say this counts as stone. So you can't fall on your face on the floor here. You have to cover the floor with something if you're going to do that. However, on the temple mount, there is no such prohibition. You would say, well, the mikdash, there's a matir in the mikdash. I have to perhaps be in the inner courtyard to do that. And the psak is based on the Rambam. No, even prostration throughout the temple mount, the stones of the temple mount, even though it's all hewn stone, you can still prostrate yourself directly on that stone because, like the Rambam says, mikdash is at the very least all of the temple mount. Last time we were learning some Lulav HaGazul, so we're going to finish what we saw in Lulav HaGazul. So I asked the question, like, wait a minute, but I thought the conclusion of the Gemara was the other way around. It turns out, yes, if you stop where we stopped, you'd think that way. But Rambam and Rashi continued. We're on the second page of the sources I sent. This brings us back to the last part of Lulav HaGazul we'll see for now. Way we understood is Rabbi Yot ben Zakkai basically made a rule regarding when the Omer, the new grain crop, becomes permissible. The way we understood it is Midoraisa, it starts, really, the day starts and then the crop is permissible. But when the temple's standing, you have to wait for the korban to be brought and then the new crop is permissible. And we see in the second page, Omer Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai b'shitat Rav Yehuda Amrei, Damar min haTorah hu aser. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was holding of Rav Yehuda's shita, which is that really the new grain crop is forbidden the entire second day of Passover. It only becomes permissible in the second day, unless the korban is brought the first day of Chol Moed. The Gemara continues, Dichtiv ad etzem hayom hazeh, until this very day, don't eat of the new crop, lechem, kali v'charmel, bread, parched grain, etc. Do not eat until this very day. The sages said, ad itzumo shel yom, until that very day. And Rashi says, kol hayom koru etzem hayom. The entire day you can't eat. The kasavar ad va'ad bichlal, until that day, inclusive. That day is a part of the prohibition. Rashi continues in the Rashi letters, velo darish ad velo ad bichlal. Doesn't mean until that day, but not including that day. Remember drawing number lines in what is it, sixth grade math? I tell you, is it x is equal to or greater than 3. Sometimes x is just more than 3. Sometimes there's an equal sign. That means it includes 3. And you have to fill in the hole, you color it black. So in this case, he says that there are 2 ways you could have understood this Doraisa. The grain crop is forbidden until that day, which is the second day of Passover, or until that day and including that day, which means the permission will only kick in the next day. So in this case, they're more machmir. Of Passover. What's known as, for some reason, we could still say Passover. No one ever says Pentecost and Tabernacles anymore. But Passover I still see. And then I wanted to show my daughter, she asked me, what's Pentecost? I said, well, I speak English, that's what I refer to the holiday of Shavuot. And I wanted to show her my art scroll Machzer that that's the case. And then lo and behold, I went through the entire art scroll Machzer. And this is the Machzer from about 28 years ago. And it still never says Pentecost once. So art scroll already led the revolution. Birnbaum has, Birnbaum is the Masorah, but this isn't, what?
Birnbaum's in the UK, no?
No, he made American considered. No, definitely not UK. Yeah, Birnbaum, totally New Yorker. The prayer for example, how do you know it's American? Because the prayer for the states mentions the president and the vice president and not Her Majesty. Ad va'ad bichlal. Okay. Okay, hold on one second. Here it says here, v'lo darish ad v'lo ad bichlal la tiro b'heir mizrach kileka Omer. They're really, the way Rabbi Yochanan understands this, like Rabbi Yehuda, is supposed to be that the day doesn't permit the new crop unless the korban is brought. And here's how you establish the proper understanding of the pasuk. Ein Omer, if there is no korban Omer to be brought, ad etzem ve'ad bichlal. So the prohibition is until today and the entire today. Yesh Omer ad haviachem. If there is a korban Omer, then it's until you bring the korban. And it could very well be that already, like they said, they assume by noontime the new crop is now permitted. So there's a kasha on this statement. A kasha that's going to be dealt with. I put the kasha in red for those keeping score at home, so you can see where the kasha begins and ends. Umi savar lekavate. Is it true that Rabbi Yochanan held like Rabbi Yehuda? Vaha maflig paligale. I thought it seems that they are actually arguing with each other. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda, or more accurately, as they point out, Rabbi Yehuda would disagree with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai because he lived a generation later. It says here in Rashi, Rabbi Yehuda alei. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Why? She matzinu. Hold on, it's hard for me to read here. She tama Rabbi Yehuda bedoro al takonas rivaz. Rabbi Yehuda, in his day, was surprised by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's takana. Lama tala hadavar ba'atzmo demashma la'asot siyag. Rabbi Yehuda looked at Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's opinion and said, why is he making like a takana here as though it's a siyag? A siyag is when the sages say, don't do something lest you come to do an actual prohibition. V'alo min Torah hu aser. Rabbi Yehuda basically looked at Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai's takana and said, that entire day you're not allowed to eat of the new grain crop anyways. So what's Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai enacting? Implying that Rabbi Yehuda felt that the entire day is forbidden min Torah, and Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai's enactment was not addressing what Rabbi Yehuda thought. As it says, now we're continuing the Gemara, regular words. Mishacharav Beit Mikdash Hithkin Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai Sheyehei Yom Hanev Kulo Asur. When the temple was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai enacted that the grain crop would be forbidden that entire second day of Passover. What do you mean an enactment? If it was always prohibited all along, he doesn't enact such a thing. Usually hitkin means an enactment, or tikain, in this case it's a hifil. Omer lo Rabbi Yehuda said to him, Va'lo mina Torahu asur. Obviously, Rabbi Yehuda couldn't say this directly to Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. He wasn't there. But that's what he said concerning understanding this. He said, the entire day it's forbidden anyways. Like we said, that means this very day it's prohibited and the entire day it's prohibited. So it's a good question. We cannot basically say that Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai understood, at least if this historical account is correct, that Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai understood this matter the way Rabbi Yehuda understood it. Rabbi Yehuda seems to definitely say that midoraisa, the entire second day of Passover, the new grain crop is forbidden unless the korban is to be brought. And it seems that Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai understood it that midoraisa, it's actually permissible this entire day. And it's Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai who said, you know what, the entire day it should be prohibited. What? What would prevent it? If the temple's not standing. If we can't do a lot of things. We assume that no temple, no sacrificial service, even though there are exceptions, and there have been historical exceptions. The general rule is we assume that, let's say, for example, if someone were to take a Nazirite vow today, we assume he'd be stuck as a Nazir, even though he did it for just 30 days, because the temple is not standing. No temple, usually we can assume that the sacrifices will not be brought. Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai was around when the temple was destroyed. That according to the way we first understood this, if the temple had not been standing, the grain crop would become permissible with sunrise. Now the temple is standing, thank God, so you have to wait for them to bring the korban Omer. Rabbi Yehuda understood it to mean the grain crop is forbidden the entire day, midoraisa, unless they bring the korban. And Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai apparently made a takana that the grain crop should be forbidden until the entire day, so that when they rebuild the temple, people understand that you have to wait for something. You can't just eat right at the beginning. But now we established over here, according to Rav Nachum Bar Yitzchak, Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai agreed with Rabbi Yehuda's understanding. So what's the answer over here, according to Rav Nachum Bar Yitzchak? Rabbi Yehuda hu de katai. Rabbi Yehuda must have made a mistake. Hu savar midraman kamar velohi. Rabbi Yehuda thought that Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai was making a takana d'Rabbanan and prohibiting the grain crop this entire day. Velohi, but it's not true. Midoraisa kamar. Really, Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai was reminding people, now midoraisa, the grain crop is forbidden the entire day. It always was. The ha hitkin kamar, right? This is what I made the bold letters. When it says that Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai enacted this, my hitkin, darash v'hitkin. He made a drasha and he enacted something. He understood, like Rabbi Yehuda, explained why it is that the din really is what it is. That's interesting that you could derive a biblical rule that was there all along, but you could find it alluded to in the verse in a way that no one had explicitly seen beforehand. That's a totally legitimate way of expounding the Torah. It's one of the midos that the Torah is Nidreshes behind. And I heard Rav Schechter say a few times in Rabbi Soloveitchik's name that there's actually, what do you do when you have one of these rules that is derived through these laws of exposition, but it was never explicit before? It's a real chiddush. It has a din d'oraisa. Even though it's novel in its time, it's still as though God gave it to Moses, and it describes a din d'oraisa. Hold on a second, I just dropped that. Yeah, please.
I thought the sources are detailed, you need the Masorah.
Need a Masorah. So what do you mean by need a Masorah? What do you mean by Masorah?
That is the Masorah that is Derek of Russia applies to this purpose.
So I think that if you read, let's say what Rav Kook pointed out, that really, even if something had never been said explicitly, if it's really in there in the pasuk that you could use one of these rules of expounding, you could come up with a rule that might not even been known. That's a part of the Chiddush of the Rabbi Akiva story. Who was it? Rav saw Rabbi Akiva? He imagined that he explained that Moshe Rabbeinu was wondering about all these allusions in the Torah. Why the kotzim, right? Tagmin, things like that, and the letters. He says, I'll show you what Rabbi Akiva was going to do. Rabbi Akiva is able to derive all sorts of halachas. He says, halacha l'Moshe b'Sinai. Really? Is it halacha l'Moshe b'Sinai? A lot of cases, it's not necessarily. It means it was alluded to in there all along, and they just had to figure it out. The Rambam talks about spending time studying lavin davar mitoch tavar, understanding something from something else. Nowadays, because we're ultra conservative in our attitudes towards everything, we don't give room for novelty in Jewish thought. But really, there's a lot that still is to be discovered within the Torah in matters of Agadata and Halacha. And we just have to train ourselves to think that way, and then we could figure things out as they come along, like answers to questions that are there, or find patterns in the Torah. There's room for a chidush, and we shouldn't necessarily reject it. It's all in there. The Torah wasn't, let's say, I was telling my friend the other day that God knows everything, right? He could have given Moshe Rabbeinu the knowledge of technology to create the warp drive and the teleportation conduit, Star Trek-like stuff. But he did not, right? Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't even build an airplane. But he did give him a system of deriving laws and theological truths. A system. Not everything was said explicitly, and there's all sorts of things that were waiting to be discovered. That's why you could have this concept that there's a din d'oraisa. For example, just give one example. Only Davidic kings can sit in the temple courtyard. Did Moshe Rabbeinu come down from Sinai and transmit to Joshua, only Davidic kings can sit in the temple courtyard? Do you announce that already? Or give him just a blueprint, here's the rest of history, this man will be chosen king, and then there'll be halacha that applies to him? Certainly not. It means that the Torah system, what we call Torah Shebaal Peh, which is the system we use to study the written Torah, allows for such derivations to ultimately be made through the guidance of, as the Rambam says, the prophets and those close to prophets, his term for the sages. So that's how I understand this. There's a lot that was waiting to be discovered, and thank God there's still a lot waiting to be discovered. I saw that there was one fellow criticized another person. He said that he says things I never heard before. And he comes up with all sorts of things, new ideas. And I know a more veteran rabbi said, he has the power of Kiddush. He's able to figure things out. That's great. You're complimenting him. But he said this guy was, the criticizer was ultra conservative, doesn't have any room for perhaps there's something new. And we have to keep an open mind. As my father-in-law says, don't want to have too much of an open mind though, because if you have too much of an open mind, your brain will fall out, right? So, okay, so that's we'll read the last part of Rashi. It says here, "Lefi shehayu regilin le'chol chadash mechatzot." They used to eat the new grain crop from midday, ul halon, and from then on. Kishehaya habayis kayam, when the temple was standing. Ad achshav hutzrach l'taken. And that's what they used to do. So now he had to tell people the takein. It doesn't mean enact from scratch. Rather, he had to set things in order and tell them, midoraisa, you're not allowed to eat the new grain crop. And that's what the understanding we saw in the Rambam, for example.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.